This is the city of Gwalior in central India. Today it's a scrappy provincial town, but during the Raj, the city was the capital of a princely state the size of Portugal. At its heart, Gwalior's Maharaja decided to flatter his British masters by building one of the most European palaces in Asia. Today, this extraordinary folly still stands, a monument to the fatal friendship between the empire and its Indian princes. God created the Maharajas, wrote Kipling, so that mankind might have the spectacle of jewels and marble palaces. In 1872, Maharaja Jayajirao of Gwalior decided to build this grand marble fantasy. Besotted by things Western, he rejected Indian designs. Yet Vilas' palace was scorned by those it was intended to impress. Behind his back, visiting Brits laughed at the Maharaja's grandiose creation. One commented, "It's nothing more than a jumble of decorations like one sees in lodging houses at home." 100 years later, perhaps we see it differently. After a century of austere modern architecture, it appears rather sumptuous and spectacular. A fortune was spent on Vilas. Particular care was lavished on this, the great Darbar Hall. It was here that the Maharajas held court.
Scindia had been determined that his new palace should be an essay in superlatives. This Darbar Hall was to be the most spacious drawing room in India. Underfoot was laid the largest carpet in the world, so large that it had to be woven in situ, while above were hung the two biggest chandeliers in all Asia.
They were so heavy that the roof had first to be tested. A ramp a mile long was constructed and 12 elephants led up. After they had spent a week trudging about, the rafters were declared sound and the chandeliers lifted into place.
It used to be originally lit by gas lamps. And then one of the gas lamps apparently fell down and burnt a hole in the carpet, you know. My grandfather said, "No, this won't do, you know. We've got to have proper lighting." So in came these chandeliers weighing 2.5 tons each. And the architects of the hall, when he was on his deathbed, the story goes that he summoned my grandfather to his bedside as a last request. And my grandfather thought he would be asking him to look after the family and just see that his wife and children and everyone were looked after. But no. They say, the story goes that with his last breath, he said, "Test those chandelier hooks every 15 years. You know.
At the height of the Raj, Vilas' palace played host to a steady stream of viceroys and British monarchs. Here the Prince of Wales visits in 1922. The main attraction for any trip to Gwalior was to go tiger hunting. Up to 700 elephants would be used on one shoot. No viceroy would miss the opportunity to bag his beast in one of the best tiger reserves in India. Length counted for everything, measured from nose to tail. It was for a royal tiger hunt that the present Maharaja's great-grandfather, Jayajirao Scindia, decided to build Vilas. In preparation for the Prince of Wales's visit in 1875, Jayajirao commanded Colonel Michael Vilas to knock something up. But first Vilas was packed off on a grand tour of Europe, for he had only designed one building before, and that was the Gwalior jail. Vilas had just 3 years to design and build the palace. That he managed to train his Indian craftsmen to emulate the Western style and construct such a palace in central India on such a timescale was little short of a miracle. And yet, everything was ready when HRH arrived, including a number of rather eccentric novelties.
Scindia's favourite toy, and one of the most inspired diversions of Vilas, was the silver train which carried the nuts, cigars and port around the Gwalior dining room. When you lifted a decanter, the train stopped. It's not exactly clear what went wrong with the mechanism the night of the Prince of Wales's visit. But on the evening of the royal dinner, the train braked too suddenly, derailed, and toppled the port decanter right over onto the Prince of Wales' lap.
But the mishap was soon forgotten in the rosy mutual appreciation that developed between monarch and Maharaja. One-third of all India was administered by these princes in 562 separate states. The Maharajas were all powerful within their dominions, but only as long as they towed the British line. The security and the prosperity of the Raj and of the Maharajas depended on the two maintaining a successful working relationship. The Viceroy Lord Curzon regarded the Scindias as particularly loyal allies. They had, after all, supported the British at the time of the Great Mutiny, and he considered Madhavrao Scindia the most efficient and fair-minded of the lot. But Curzon did not rate all the princes so highly. He warned Queen Victoria that the Rana of Dalrymple was fast sinking into an inebriate and a sot. The Maharaja of Patiala was little better than a jockey, while Maharaja Holkar had horrible vices. Curzon did not report that one prince would annually appear stark naked in front of his subjects. If he managed an impressive erection, then things were looking up for the coming year. The special relationship between the Scindias and the Raj is evident in this 1920 feature film, Emerald of the East, filmed on location at Vilas.
They mixed with us so well. Like, for instance, I had a teacher who was a housekeeper, one Mrs. Stephen. She was a very old lady. She used to come to our school to take only one English class for us. And she would come in a very old Ford car, driving herself, very old lady. And first thing she would come and would say, "Don't slouch, sit up straight. You cannot be a lady if you slouch."
Life for the young princes and their friends was modelled on the British public school. It was hoped that through this experience they would feel more at home with the English upper classes than their own countrymen.
As children, we had highly structured schedules, starting off at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. Right from the age of about 5, we had to report to the parade ground, both my sisters and I. And we had to exercise 3 horses. And exercise means until they lathered and until they were really, sweating, my father wouldn't allow us to get off. He was himself brought up in a very, very disciplined fashion himself. That's why it all got transferred on when he took the place of the parent. Because when he was a very young boy, about 6 or 7, along with his sister, they were recruited into the army.
Young George, named after George V, here with his sister Mary, was taught to respect the British. But today it is a touchy subject to suggest that this allegiance was anything more than skin deep.
Well, there was a certain admiration for the manner in which the British ran their affairs. I think every adversary, in battle or otherwise, feels this about the opponent. And I think we really did feel like that. But there's no question of feeling an affection or a loyalty for people who were ruling the country. That's not possible. But certainly there was an admiration for the way in which they handled it, the way they managed to break up families, the way they managed to put people against each other, the way they managed to basically run such a huge empire. But the loyalty...
The scene is in Gwalior, some 200 miles south of Delhi, and the Maharaja, riding in a coach drawn by 16 horses, is on his way to the temple for ceremonies to be held during the great Hindu festival of Dussehra. With all respect to His Highness and the occasion, I must say his coachman seems to have a very easy time.
A lot of people would come throng to the streets where Maharaja would pass, and say, for instance, during Holi, the Maharaja would go and play Holi with the people, common people on the streets. They would throw color on him, and he would go in a vehicle with bucketfuls of color and throw it on the people thronging on the side of streets. Then there was a darbar also, in the darbar hall here, where strict ceremonials were observed. And then there were dancing girls, and those dancing girls were state government servants. I mean, they were paid this thing. They were not prostitutes in that sense. They were dancing girls meant for ceremonial occasions.
Were they available to the Sardars or only to the Maharaja?
Well, they were available, but available for singing and music.
Only?
Yes.
Now there is the elephant procession. The Maharaja, riding in the golden howdah on the back of his state elephant and attended by troops, courtiers and servants, proceeds slowly round the city in great magnificence.
Now, when I look back on it, it's almost like the fantasy world. We felt privileged. I remember I used to go to school where I was the star of the show. My birthday, I used to arrive in school and there was no child who didn't give me a gift. I think back on it and I don't remember thinking about anybody else's birthday. In the year, there was nobody else's birthday that I had to remember. But they all remembered my birthday, and I used to come home beaming with carloads of presents, and you know, it was fantastic. Of course, I couldn't go out to any of their homes for dinner or spend the night, but they would be privileged to come to us.
Life at home for the prince and princesses ranged over 300 rooms, many filled with knickknacks picked up on foreign trips. In retrospect, there is much that is comic in the Maharaja's imitation of Western styles. So often they just got it wrong, whether in designing high kitsch, cut-glass rooms as garish as anything in Elvis Presley's Gracelands, or in the choice of pictures and other works of art to decorate their palaces. But a real tragedy lies behind this comedy, the consequences of which can be seen just a few miles away. Immediately above Vilas lies one of the finest forts in India. The Man Mandir was built in the late 1400s. It was the inspiration for many of the Mughals' finest buildings and contributed to an architectural tradition that culminated in the Taj Mahal. It did not take much to get the Victorian mind fantasizing about the voluptuousness of Eastern courts. But forts like Gwalior sent them into overdrive. Such places, they believed, were dark and threatening, filled with steamy harems and latticed walls through which unseen eyes constantly watched. The Victorians hoped that once immersed in the new values of the Raj, the Maharajas would inevitably find such old palaces unsuited to the needs of the modern age. And they were right.
In rejecting Indian styles in favour of European architecture, as the princes did in court after court across India, the Maharajas turned their immense powers of patronage away from local craftsmen working in Indian styles. In this way, they killed off a millennia-old artistic tradition, a blow from which India has never fully recovered.
The problem was, in the end, Vilas appealed to no one. The British laughed at its idiosyncratic decoration, while Maharaja Jayajirao found the building unsuited to his lifestyle. There was nowhere he could lie back and watch his dancing girls, just a series of rooms the size of aircraft hangars, full of uncomfortable Chippendale chairs. Only a few years after completing the palace, at enormous cost, he decided to move out. But Vilas remained an embarrassing monument to the ties between the Raj and the Scindias as India moved towards independence. The present Maharaja's father continued to rule over his subjects as the new democratic India drew closer. But the days of the old feudal order were numbered. With the move towards independence, the princes became increasingly identified as collaborators with the Raj. The Maharajas, for their part, were under no illusion that they'd become thoroughly dependent on the British. Few spoke out for independence.
Was the freedom movement popular here in Gwalior?
It was with the people, but not with the nobility. I am telling you that my father, when as a little girl, myself and my sister, we joined a procession of these Mahatma Gandhi or somebody's procession was going, and we were very much punished for that. You should not do that. You will be disloyal to the royal family and the British. They are so good to us. That is what I heard from my father.
With independence in 1947, the new Prime Minister, Pandit Nehru, visited Vilas. For the Sardars, the ruling noblemen, the news was bad. The Maharaja agreed with nearly all the other princely states to give up his lands to the newly formed republic. The old order was crumbling.
How many of the Sardars never really found another role? The majority of them? Or the majority?
It was, you see, it was abrupt. We were amongst the senior Jadars, but there were Sardars much better off than us. And in our own stables, we had 15 horses and an elephant. We maintained an elephant because that elephant was used for ceremonial parades. Now we can't even keep a donkey.
Sorry about that.
Finally, in 1970, Indira Gandhi abolished the title of Maharaja, forcing the last ruler of Gwalior to enter democratic politics as plain Mr. Scindia. Madhavrao Scindia is travelling down to his Gwalior constituency from Delhi. Today he's a senior figure in the Congress Party, the very party which took away his kingdom, his privy purse and his title.
You've developed a very good single movement of removing your garlands. It's a practiced hand, I can see.
Well practiced, I can assure you. And let me tell you, it's very, very tiring.
I bet.
Because in India, you have the system. Everyone garlands, you know. I garland my seniors, they garland me. This business goes on. And it's a ritual. And the problem
Here we
really
go
is...
again.
Mr. Scindia, in making a career of politics, has done what many of the old Maharajas have done. To survive, he has had to integrate, to accept the democratic order. There is, of course, a paradox here. Madhavrao prides himself on being a modern democrat, but his power base is built on the affection of simple villagers for their old feudal lord.
Chambal Yojana ke karan, coming from an established family is certainly a help. But it's only a launching pad. You have to do much more now. And that's why some princely families you'll see have come to grief on this, because they haven't been able to integrate. They have not been able to identify. And therefore, still being from very large former states, from erstwhile states, they still lose elections. So there's much, much more now than just belonging to a family. It helps, but it's nowhere near enough.
What do you miss most of the old days?
Well, actually, the old days we miss, altogether we miss them. You just can't sort of pinpoint any of them. Everything is missed.
Old days, there was not much competition.
That is true.
It was a very much sheltered life. Now it is a competitive, and unless you pull somebody down, you can't go up. That is the thing.
Yes.
And what is to become of Jai Vilas in the India of today? The present Maharaja's son, in common with most of the new Indian elite, has had an American education. He has plans to bring new world management techniques to the palace.
When I do take over Vilas, I think that the direction is going to be twofold. My primary objective is going to be macro-oriented, which is to promote tourism in and around Gwalior. My wife would be mainly involved in trying to promote tourism from a Vilas point of view. I think she would be looking at converting the Vilas property into a heritage museum.
Would this vision of the palace have shocked Jayajirao, its creator? I think not, for the Scindias have always been survivors, and they know how to move with the times.